The recycled air of the plane cabin tasted metallic against my tongue, stale and suffocating in a way that made my chest tighten with each shallow breath. I pressed my forehead against the cool oval window, watching the tarmac crew below scurry like ants as passengers shuffled past me down the narrow aisle. The fabric of the middle seat scratched against my bare arm, cheap, worn thin from thousands of bodies that had occupied this exact spot before me. I'd chosen the window seat in row 23 deliberately, tucking myself as far back in economy as possible, hoping to disappear into the mediocrity of it all. My fingers traced the frayed edge of my daughter's hospital bracelet still wrapped around my wrist, the plastic yellowed and cracked from 3 years of constant wear. Mia. Her name was printed there in smudged blue ink, a ghost of the baby I'd held for 6 precious hours before the fever took her. The grief counselor said I should remove it, that holding on to physical reminders prevented healing. But how do you heal from a wound that goes bone deep? How do you stop being a mother just because your child no longer breathes? The boarding process dragged on with excruciating slowness. A businessman wedged an oversized carry-on into the overhead compartment above me, his expensive cologne, something with notes of leather and cedar, briefly masking the airplane smell. I caught a glimpse of his Rolex as he struggled with the bag, the gold glinting under the harsh cabin lights. My own wrist bore only Mia's bracelet and the pale line where my wedding ring used to sit before I'd pawned it to pay for her funeral. I was nobody. Invisible. Just another tired woman in a wrinkled clearance rack blouse, flying back to a city that held nothing but memories of failure. That's when I heard it. The crying started as a whimper, thin and reedy, somewhere toward the front of the plane. Within seconds, it escalated into full-throated wails that pierced through the ambient noise of settling passengers and clicking seatbelts. My body responded before my mind could catch up. My arms ached with phantom weight. My breasts tingled with the memory of milk that had dried up years ago. And my heart performed that peculiar twist that only mothers understand. The woman in the aisle seat beside me grimaced. Great. A screamer. This is going to be a fun flight. I didn't respond. I was too busy watching the commotion unfold 6 rows ahead in first class. Through the gap between seats, I could see fragments, a flash of a navy suit that probably cost more than my car, the rigid set of broad shoulders, the way other passengers instinctively shifted away from the man holding the screaming infant. Even from this distance, even with my limited view, I could sense something dangerous radiating from him. It was in the way he moved, economical, controlled, like violence held on a very short leash. 2 men flanked him on either side, standing in the aisle despite the flight attendants' increasingly frantic requests for everyone to take their seats. They weren't dressed in suits, but their posture screamed security. One of them had a bulge beneath his jacket that I recognized from my brief, disastrous marriage to a cop, a weapon, on a plane. The baby's cries intensified, raw and desperate in a way that bypassed my rational mind and went straight to some primal place. I knew that sound. That wasn't hunger or a dirty diaper. That was pain or fear, or the existential terror of an infant who needed comfort and couldn't find it. The man, the father I assumed, tried to adjust the baby in his arms, but his movements were stiff, uncertain. He held the child like a businessman holding a package that might explode. All awkward angles and barely contained frustration. The baby, wrapped in what looked like a designer blanket, screamed louder. A flight attendant approached, her practiced smile wavering. "Sir, we need to prepare for takeoff. If you could just... I'm trying." His voice cut through the chaos, low and cold enough to make the attendant step back. It wasn't loud, but it carried. Authority, menace, the kind of voice that expected immediate obedience. The baby disagreed with a fresh wave of shrieks. 3 rows up, an older woman stood and approached them. "Let me help. I've raised 5 children, I can..." One of the security men blocked her path with a single step. "Sit down, ma'am." "But the baby needs..." "Sit down." The woman retreated, red-faced and muttering. The baby continued to wail, the sound drilling into my skull, reactivating neural pathways I'd spent 3 years trying to sever. My hands trembled in my lap. I pressed my palms together, trying to anchor myself to the present, to this plane, to this reality where I was no longer a mother and had no business caring about someone else's screaming child. But God, that sound. The man stood abruptly, the baby held at an awkward distance from his body as if proximity might somehow increase the volume. Through the narrow gaps between seats and heads, I caught my first real glimpse of his face. He was younger than I'd expected, early 30s maybe, with the kind of severe handsomeness that belonged on movie villains. Sharp jawline, dark hair styled with precision, and eyes that even from this distance appeared almost black. But it was the tension in his features that caught my attention, the barely concealed fury warring with something else. Panic? Desperation? The baby's face had gone purple with the effort of crying. Formula, one of the security men suggested, his accent thick. Eastern European, maybe Russian, already tried. She won't take it. Doctor said. I know what the doctor said. The cold voice again, sharp enough to draw blood. Nothing's working. The flight attendant returned with the captain in tow. Sir, I'm very sorry, but if the child can't be calmed, we may have to ask you to deplane. Other passengers. Are you telling me to get off this plane? Each word dropped like a stone into still water, creating ripples of tension that spread through the cabin. The captain, a gray-haired man who probably outweighed the passenger by 50 pounds, somehow seemed smaller. It's a matter of safety and comfort for all our passengers. Perhaps you could take some time, get the baby settled, and catch a later flight. This flight. We're on this flight, sir. Do you know who I am? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. The captain's face went pale. He leaned in, listened to something the passenger whispered, and straightened up with a jerky nod. Of course. We'll make accommodations. Whatever name had been shared, it carried weight. The kind of weight that bent rules and broke regulations. I should have looked away. Should have put in my earbuds and pretended to sleep through takeoff like every other passenger desperately trying to ignore the situation. Instead, I found myself standing, my body moving on autopilot, propelled by a force I couldn't name and didn't want to examine. Excuse me, I said, my voice barely audible over the crying. I squeezed past the woman in the aisle seat, who looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I walked up the aisle, aware of every eye tracking my movement. The security men noticed me immediately, their hands moving toward their jackets in synchronized threat. I kept walking, my heart hammering against my ribs, until I stood at the threshold between economy and first class. A literal line marked by a curtain and worlds of difference. Up close, the man was even more imposing. Tall, easily 6'3" or 6'4", with the kind of presence that seemed to consume oxygen. His suit was impeccable despite the baby's distress. Charcoal with subtle pinstripes that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. A watch gleamed at his wrist. Something complicated and Swiss. He smelled of expensive cologne and something else. Something darker. Gunpowder? Leather? Danger? His eyes met mine, and the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. Can I help? The words tumbled out before I could stop them. With the baby, I might be able to help. One of the security men moved to intercept me, but the man raised a hand. Just barely, the gesture almost imperceptible, and the guard froze. You're a nanny? His gaze raked over me, cataloging my cheap clothes, my tired face, my complete lack of professional polish. No, what was I? A mother with empty arms? A woman with nothing left to lose? I'm a mother. I know babies. She won't stop crying. I can hear that. No one can calm her. Frustration cracked through his carefully controlled exterior. I've tried everything. Formula, rocking, walking. The doctor cleared her for flying. Nothing's wrong with her. She just won't stop. The baby's cries had shifted pitch, becoming hoarse and desperate. My arms literally ached with the need to reach out. May I? I extended my hands, trying to keep them steady. He stared at me for a long moment, those dark eyes searching for something. Threats? Hidden agendas? Whatever he was looking for, he apparently didn't find it, because he slowly, so slowly it felt like the entire plane held its breath, extended the baby toward me. The moment her small, warm weight settled into my arms, everything else fell away. I'd forgotten this. The specific heft of an infant, the way they molded against your body, the heat they generated. This baby girl, maybe 5 or 6 months old, was dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than my plane ticket, her dark hair damp with sweat from crying. She hiccuped, her face still red and tear-streaked, looking up at me with eyes the same haunting dark shade as her father's. "Hey, sweet girl," I whispered, automatically adjusting her position to support her head, tucking her against my chest in a hold my body remembered even if my mind had tried to forget. "Hey, it's okay. You're okay." I started to sway, a gentle rocking motion that came from some deep, instinctive place. My hand moved in slow circles on her back, and I hummed. Not a song exactly, just a low, rhythmic sound that Mia used to love. The baby's cries stuttered, then softened. I felt every person in first class watching us, but my entire focus narrowed to the child in my arms. I adjusted her angle slightly, noticed how she'd been held too rigidly before, kept too far from a body she needed to feel safe. Babies needed contact, warmth, the steady rhythm of another heartbeat. I pressed her closer, continuing the sway and hum, pouring 3 years of unused maternal instinct into this stranger's child. Her crying dissolved into whimpers, then hiccuping breaths, then, finally, silence. The change in atmosphere was immediate. Passengers released collective sighs of relief. The flight attendant's rigid posture softened. But I barely noticed any of it because I was staring down at this baby girl who'd stopped crying in my arms, whose tiny fist had wrapped around my finger with surprising strength, whose eyes were drifting closed with the weight of exhaustion. When I finally looked up, I found the man staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not gratitude. At least not primarily. Something more complex, more dangerous. His jaw was tight, a muscle ticking beneath the skin, and his hands had curled into fists at his sides. "How did you do that?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried an edge that made my skin prickle. She just needed to be held properly. "Babies need—" "I know what babies need." The temperature dropped again. "Who are you?" "Nobody. I'm nobody. I just wanted to help." "Your name?" It wasn't a request. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how exposed I was, standing in first class with this man's baby in my arms, surrounded by his security team, trapped between the cockpit and my seat rows away. Emma Carter." He nodded once, sharply, as if filing away the information. Then he reached out, and for a moment I thought he was going to take the baby back. Instead, his fingers wrapped around my wrist, not painful, but inescapable, and he looked down at Mia's hospital bracelet. His thumb traced the edge of the plastic, and when his eyes met mine again, something had shifted in them. Recognition? Understanding? It was gone too quickly to identify. "Take your seat, Miss Carter. The baby will be fine now. Sit down." But he didn't take the child from my arms. Instead, he gestured to one of his guards, who immediately moved to the cockpit to speak with the captain. The other guard produced a phone and stepped away. Speaking in rapid, quiet Russian, I stood frozen, the baby's warm weight in my arms, Mia's bracelet tight around my wrist where this stranger's fingers had just been. "Sir?" The flight attendant approached cautiously. "We really need everyone seated for takeoff." "She stays." He pointed at the empty first-class seat across the aisle from his. "Move her things up here." "I'm sorry, but seat assignments. Now." The flight attendant fled. I tried to process what was happening. "I can't sit in first class. My ticket is for—" "Your ticket is for wherever I say it's for." He finally took the baby from my arms, and I felt the loss like a physical ache. "Sit down, Miss Carter. You're going to tell me everything about yourself. And then you're going to explain to me why you're the only person on this plane who could calm my daughter." The baby, already drowsy in my arms, didn't cry when he took her back. She simply settled against his chest with a soft sigh, apparently satisfied now that whatever she'd needed had been given. I should have refused, should have insisted on returning to my own seat, to my own row, to my own invisible existence. Instead, I sank into the leather first-class seat, butter-soft and obscenely comfortable, and watched as a security guard brought my battered carry-on from economy. The man settled into his seat across the aisle, the baby cradled more confidently now in his arms. He'd learned something from watching me, I realized. had memorized the exact position, the angle, the way I'd supported her head. As the plane began to taxi, he turned to look at me, and the intensity of his gaze made my mouth go dry. "I don't believe in coincidences, Miss Carter," he said softly, dangerously. "So either you're going to tell me who sent you, or you're going to convince me that stumbling into my life was nothing more than extraordinarily bad luck." The baby slept peacefully against his chest as the plane lifted into the sky, carrying us all toward a destination that suddenly felt much more uncertain than the city I'd been fleeing. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude, and my stomach did that peculiar swoop that had nothing to do with the ascent. Across the narrow aisle, the man, I still didn't know his name, watched me with the focused intensity of a predator deciding whether I was prey or threat. The baby slept soundly against his chest now, her small fist curled into the fabric of his expensive suit, oblivious to the tension crackling between us. "I'm waiting." His voice was calm, almost conversational, which somehow made it more menacing than if he'd shouted. I gripped the armrest, feeling the supple leather beneath my fingertips, such a stark contrast to the worn fabric of economy. "I already told you. Nobody sent me. I heard your daughter crying and I acted on impulse." He tilted his head slightly, studying me like I was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Women don't typically approach me on impulse, Miss Carter. They're usually too smart for that. Maybe I'm not that smart." Something flickered across his face. Amusement, perhaps, or approval, or maybe you're smarter than you look. His gaze dropped to my clothes again, that deliberate assessment that made me feel simultaneously exposed and invisible. Those shoes. Payless? Target? I looked down at my scuffed ballet flats, heat rising to my cheeks. Target. The blouse. Clearance rack. It wasn't a question. I nodded anyway, humiliation burning in my throat. No jewelry except that bracelet. No wedding ring. But there's a tan line where one used to be. He shifted the baby slightly, one hand supporting her head with practiced ease now. "You're running from something, or someone." "I'm not running." The lie tasted bitter. "I'm just going home." "Where's home?" "Chicago." "And where were you?" "Miami. Visiting a friend." Another lie. I'd been in Miami because it was as far as I could get from Chicago on the money I'd scraped together, because I'd needed to feel the sun on my skin and pretend for a few days that I wasn't drowning in grief and debt. One of the security guards approached, leaning down to whisper something in Russian. The man's expression darkened, but he nodded once. The guard retreated, and those black eyes returned to me. "You're lying." He said it matter-of-factly, without accusation. "But that's fine. Everyone lies. What matters is why." He adjusted the baby again, and I noticed how natural the movement had become, how quickly he'd adapted. "The bracelet. Tell me about it." My hand moved automatically to cover it, protective. "It's personal. Everything about you is personal to me now, Miss Carter. You touched my daughter. You calmed her when no one else could. That makes you interesting." He paused, and the weight of his attention felt like a physical thing. "And interesting people in my life tend to be either very useful or very dangerous. I need to determine which category you fall into." The flight attendant appeared with a cart, her smile bright and practiced. "Can I offer either of you a beverage? Champagne? We have an excellent—" "Water," the man said without looking at her. "Room temperature. And bring her whatever she wants." "I'm fine," I started to say, but he cut me off. "She'll have water too, and food. Bring the meal service early." The attendant nodded and hurried away. I should have been grateful. I was hungry, hadn't eaten since a stale bagel at the Miami airport. But instead I felt trapped, like accepting his hospitality was accepting something far more binding than a simple meal. "The bracelet," he prompted again, softer this time. I looked down at Mia's name, at the faded blue ink and yellowed plastic. 3 years of showers, of sleeping, of living while she couldn't. My daughter, she died 3 years ago. The silence that followed felt enormous, swallowing all the ambient plane noise. When I finally worked up the courage to look at him, his expression had shifted into something I couldn't quite read. Not pity, thank God, not pity. Something else. Recognition, maybe. "How old?" 6 hours. My voice cracked. "She lived for 6 hours. He looked down at the sleeping baby in his arms, his jaw tight. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You didn't know her." "No. But I understand what it means to lose someone." His thumb stroked gentle circles on his daughter's back, a gesture that seemed unconscious. "This is Natasha. She's 5 months old. Her mother died giving birth to her." The confession hung between us, raw and unexpected. I didn't know what to say, what words could possibly bridge the gap between our respective griefs. "That's why," I gestured vaguely toward the baby. "You're learning how to be her father." "I'm doing a shit job of it." The profanity sounded strange in his controlled voice, like a crack in perfectly smooth glass. "I have 6 people on staff who are supposed to help. Nannies, nurses, specialists. All of them were unavailable for this trip. So it's just me and Victor and Dimitri." He nodded toward the 2 security guards positioned at either end of first class. "And none of us know what the fuck we're doing with a baby. Why did you have to travel with her? Couldn't you have—" "No." The word came out sharp, final. "She goes where I go, always." There was a story there, something dark and complicated, but before I could process it, the flight attendant returned with our waters and 2 elaborate meal trays that looked nothing like the sad sandwich I'd planned to eat in economy. "Thank you." I took the water, grateful for something to do with my hands. He didn't touch his tray. Instead, he watched me take a tentative sip, then another. "You're afraid of me." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Should I be?" "Yes." No hesitation. "Most people are." "Because of who you are?" "Because of what I am." He glanced down at Natasha, something protective and fierce crossing his features. "I'm not a good man, Miss Carter. I've done things that would keep you awake at night. I operate in spaces where good men don't survive. And everyone around me, everyone, is either an asset or a liability. Which am I?" "I haven't decided yet." The honesty was somehow more frightening than any threat. I set down my water with a shaking hand. "I should go back to my seat." "No." "You can't just—" "I can." He shifted Natasha slightly, preparing to stand. "Victor, take her." The guard, Victor apparently, approached immediately, and the man carefully transferred the sleeping baby into his arms. Victor held her with surprising gentleness, immediately assuming the same position I'd demonstrated, the same supportive hold. The man stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced efficiency, and gestured toward the back of the plane. "Walk with me." "Where?" "Away from listening ears." I should have refused. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in my seat, surrounded by witnesses, by the illusion of safety. Instead, I found myself standing, following him past the curtain dividing first class from economy into the narrow galley area where flight attendants prepared meals and drinks. He closed the curtain behind us, creating a pocket of privacy in the cramped space. We stood inches apart, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something dark and expensive with notes of bergamot and smoke, close enough to see the faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow. The dangerous intelligence in those black eyes. "I need to know I can trust you." His voice was low, intimate in a way that made my pulse quicken. "My daughter responded to you in a way she hasn't responded to anyone else. That means something." "It doesn't mean anything. I just knew how to hold her." "You knew because you're a mother." He stepped closer, eliminating even more space between us. "Because you understand what it means to love something so completely that you'd burn the world down to keep it safe." I pressed back against the galley counter, feeling the edge dig into my spine. "I don't understand what you want from me." "I want you to work for me, as Natasha's nanny." The words didn't make sense. I blinked at him, trying to process. "What?" "You need money. That's obvious from everything about you. I need someone I can trust with my daughter, someone who has no connections to my world, no agendas, no reason to use her as leverage against me." His hand came up to rest on the counter beside my hip, caging me in. "You're perfect. I'm not. I can't." My thoughts scattered like startled birds. "You don't know anything about me. I could be anyone. I could be dangerous. You're not dangerous." His certainty was absolute. Dangerous people don't wear their pain so openly. They don't risk themselves for a stranger's crying baby. His gaze dropped to Mia's bracelet again. "You're just broken. and broken people can be trusted because they understand what's at stake. This is insane. Probably. He didn't move away. But insanity is offering a stranger a job on a plane. Insanity is letting someone I don't know touch the most important thing in my life. And yet here we are. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, and I gripped the counter to steady myself. His other hand came up to brace against the wall behind me, completely surrounding me now with his body. Not threatening, not exactly, but overwhelming in a way that made it hard to breathe. I have a life in Chicago, I managed to say. A job. An apartment. What job? I hesitated. Waitress. At a diner. You're a waitress who can afford a last-minute flight to Miami? He'd caught the inconsistency. I looked away, unable to hold his gaze. I had some money saved up. I needed to get away. From? Nothing. Everything. I don't know. The truth spilled out before I could stop it. I was drowning. In Chicago, everywhere I look, I see her. The hospital where she died. The apartment where I brought all the baby things I never got to use. The cemetery where I visit every week even though I know she's not really there. Tears burned behind my eyes. I thought if I could just get away, just breathe different air for a few days. Maybe I could figure out how to keep living. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. And did you? Figure it out? No. Then come work for me. His voice was persuasive, dangerous, offering solutions that couldn't possibly be as simple as he made them sound. Leave Chicago. Leave all those ghosts behind. Start over in New York. New York? That's where I'm based. I have a house in Manhattan, another in the Hamptons. Natasha needs someone who understands her, who can give her what I can't. He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his face. She deserves better than a father who doesn't know how to comfort her when she cries. You'll learn. You're already learning. Not fast enough. His hand moved from the counter to my wrist, his fingers warm against my skin, bracketing me as bracelet. I'm offering you a way out, Miss Carter. A generous salary, housing, a purpose. All you have to do is take care of my daughter. I don't even know your name. A smile ghosted across his lips, sharp and without humor. That's probably for the best. If I'm going to work for you, and I'm not saying I will, I need to know who you are. He studied me for a long moment, weighing something. Then, with the air of someone making a decision he might regret, he said, Nikolai Volkov. The name meant nothing to me, which apparently showed on my face because his smile widened fractionally. You really aren't from my world, are you? Should I know that name? If you spent any time in certain circles? Yes. He released my wrist but didn't step back. But your ignorance is actually refreshing. It means you're exactly what you appear to be. A woman with nothing to lose and everything to run from. I'm not running. Everyone's running from something, Emma. The use of my first name sent a shiver down my spine. The only question is whether you're running toward something better or just toward another version of the same pain. Before I could respond, Victor appeared at the curtain, Natasha beginning to fuss in his arms. Nikolai immediately straightened, his entire demeanor shifting back into that cold, controlled authority. She's waking up, Victor said, his accent thick, and she's not happy. Nikolai took his daughter, and sure enough, her face was scrunching up, preparing for another crying session. He looked at me, and for the first time since this surreal conversation began, I saw something almost like helplessness in his eyes. Please, he said quietly. That single word, so at odds with everything else about him, broke through my resistance. I reached out, taking Natasha into my arms, and immediately began the gentle sway and hum that had worked before. She settled almost instantly, her tiny hand wrapping around my finger. 60,000 a year, Nikolai said, watching us. Plus room and board, health insurance, and a clothing allowance because you'll need to look presentable at certain events. I gaped at him. That's non-negotiable. You'll live in my house, in the nanny's quarters. You'll be available whenever Natasha needs you, which will be often. You'll travel with us when necessary, and you'll sign an NDA about everything you see and hear in my home. An NDA? My business requires discretion. The temperature in his voice dropped. There will be things you witness that you won't understand and shouldn't ask about. There will be people who come to my home that you should never speak to. Can you do that? Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was dangerous, that I should refuse, that men who needed NDAs and traveled with armed security were exactly the kind of men I should run from. But Natasha was warm in my arms, alive and breathing, and needing someone to care about her, and I was so tired of being empty. I need to think about it, I heard myself say. You have, until we land. Nikolai gestured back toward our seats. 2 hours to decide whether you're brave enough to accept my offer or smart enough to refuse it. As I walked back to my seat with Natasha in my arms, I couldn't shake the feeling that my decision had already been made the moment I stood up to help a crying baby that wasn't mine. I just wasn't sure yet if that made me brave or foolish. Bloco 3. The landing gear touched down at JFK with a jolt that woke Natasha, but she didn't cry this time. She simply blinked up at me with those dark, knowing eyes, so much like her father's, and made a small, contented sound before nestling back against my chest. I'd spent the last 2 hours of the flight holding her, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing, and trying to convince myself that accepting Nikolai's offer was anything other than insanity. I'd failed at the convincing part. Well? Nikolai stood in the aisle as the plane taxied toward the gate, buttoning his suit jacket with those precise, controlled movements that seemed to characterize everything about him. What's your answer? My mouth was dry. If I say yes, when you say yes. If I say yes, I continued, meeting his gaze with more courage than I felt. I need guarantees. I need to know I can leave if this doesn't work out. I need references, a contract, something that proves this is legitimate and not what? His head tilted slightly, dangerously curious. Not a trap? Not something sinister? He reached down, gently taking Natasha from my arms. She went willingly, already growing comfortable with the transfer between us. Emma, if I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't need to offer you a job first. I could simply take you. The casual way he said it made my blood run cold. But I won't, he continued, reading my expression. Because you're useful to me exactly as you are, whole, willing, and entirely devoted to keeping my daughter safe and happy. He adjusted Natasha against his shoulder. You'll have a contract by tomorrow morning. Everything legal, everything binding. And if after 1 month you want to leave, you can. With a severance package that will set you up nicely while you figure out your next move. 1 month? To prove that this arrangement works for both of us. His eyes held mine. After that, we'll renegotiate terms, possibly extend them to something more permanent. The way he said permanent sent a shiver down my spine. The plane came to a complete stop, and immediately the cabin erupted into the usual chaos of deplaning passengers. But Nikolai didn't move, and neither did Victor or Dmitri, who flanked the exit like sentries. We waited while everyone else filed out, economy passengers casting curious, envious glances at those of us in first class, until the cabin was empty, except for our strange little group. Let's go. Nikolai strode toward the exit without looking back, clearly expecting me to follow. I grabbed my battered carry-on and hurried after him, emerging into the jet bridge where a flight attendant waited with a stroller. Expensive, sleek, nothing like the second-hand one I'd registered for when I was pregnant with Mia. Nikolai secured Natasha into it with practiced efficiency, those large, dangerous hands surprisingly gentle as they buckled straps and adjusted the canopy. Then we were moving through the airport, and I realized immediately that this wasn't a normal deplaning experience. We bypassed the crowds entirely, guided by Victor through a service corridor that required a key card to access. Our footsteps echoed on concrete floors as we navigated a maze of hallways that clearly weren't meant for passengers. No lines, no security, no customs. Just empty corridors and locked doors that opened at Victor's approach. How are we? I started to ask, but Nikolai cut me off with a look. Don't ask questions you don't want answered. We emerged into a private parking area where a black SUV waited, its engine already running. The vehicle was massive, with tinted windows so dark I couldn't see inside. Dmitri opened the back door, and Nikolai lifted Natasha's stroller into the car with ease, locking it into a base that was already installed. "Get in," he told me, gesturing to the seat beside Natasha. I climbed in, sinking into leather seats that probably cost more than 3 months of my waitressing salary. The interior smelled new, expensive, with that particular scent of luxury vehicles. Nikolai slid in beside me, close enough that his thigh pressed against mine in the confined space. Victor took the front passenger seat while Dmitri drove. And then we were moving, pulling out of the private area and onto roads that led away from the airport. Through the tinted windows, I watched New York City approach, the skyline emerging like jagged teeth against the evening sky. I'd never been to New York before. In all my 32 years, I'd barely left Illinois except for that desperate flight to Miami. Now I was being driven into Manhattan in a vehicle that probably had armor plating, sitting beside a man whose name I'd Googled during the flight and found almost nothing about. That absence of information was more terrifying than anything I might have discovered. "You're quiet," Nikolai observed, his voice low enough that it didn't disturb Natasha, who'd fallen asleep again. "I'm processing." "Processing what?" "The fact that I just agreed to upend my entire life for a stranger." I turned to look at him, really look at him. In the dim interior of the car, his features seemed even more severe, carved from shadows and sharp angles. "I don't know anything about you except your name. I don't know what you do, why you need armed security, why we left the airport through a secret exit. And yet you're here. And yet I'm here," I echoed, hearing the resignation in my own voice. His hand moved to my knee, a gesture so sudden and possessive that I flinched. His fingers tightened fractionally, keeping me still. "You're here because you have good instincts, Emma. Because some part of you recognized that this is exactly where you need to be." His thumb traced a small circle against my jeans, the touch burning through the denim. "And because you already love my daughter." I barely know her. You know her enough to risk approaching a stranger on a plane, enough to spend 2 hours holding her instead of sleeping or reading or doing any of the 100 things you could have done. His hand remained on my knee, heavy and warm. "That's enough for now." The car turned onto 5th Avenue, and I pressed my face to the window, watching the city lights blur past. We drove through neighborhoods I recognized only from movies and TV shows, places I'd never imagined I'd actually see, let alone live in. Finally, we pulled up to a building that made my jaw drop. It was one of those pre-war apartment buildings that occupied an entire block, all elegant limestone and Art Deco details. A doorman in a crisp uniform stood beneath a green awning, and he moved immediately to open our car door, greeting Nikolai with a respectful nod that spoke of familiarity and fear. "Welcome home, Mr. Volkov." "Thank you, James." Nikolai exited the car with fluid grace, then reached back to unlatch Natasha's stroller. "This is Emma Carter. She'll be living here now. Make sure she's added to the approved list." James's eyebrows rose fractionally, the only sign of surprise he allowed himself. "Of course, sir. Welcome, Miss Carter." I mumbled something that might have been a thank you, too overwhelmed to form coherent sentences. Victor and Dmitri flanked us as we entered the building, passing through a lobby that looked like it belonged in a museum. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings on the walls that were probably worth more than my entire existence. An elevator attendant, an actual person whose job was apparently to operate the elevator, greeted Nikolai with the same deference as the doorman. We rode up in silence, the numbers climbing higher and higher until we reached the penthouse floor. The doors opened directly into an apartment. Not a hallway, not a landing. The elevator opened into a massive foyer with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of Central Park stretched out like a dark jewel below us. "Holy shit," I breathed, then immediately covered my mouth. "Sorry, It's fine." Nikolai pushed the stroller inside, and I followed on trembling legs. "This is home. Your quarters are on the 2nd floor, East Wing. Victor will show you." The apartment was enormous, the kind of space that didn't feel like a home so much as a statement of power. Everything was decorated in shades of gray, black, and cream, with modern furniture that looked uncomfortable but expensive. Abstract art hung on walls, and the windows, God, the windows, offered views of the city that made me dizzy. A woman appeared from somewhere deeper in the apartment, middle-aged and severe in a black dress. "Mr. Volkov, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow." "Plans changed, Elena." He gestured toward me. "This is Emma Carter, Natasha's new nanny. Please have the guest suite prepared for her tonight. Tomorrow we'll move her into the proper quarters." Elena's gaze swept over me, taking in my cheap clothes and worn shoes with barely concealed disapproval. "Of course. Shall I prepare dinner?" "Yes, something simple. And have the nursery restocked. We went through most of the supplies on the plane." The woman nodded and disappeared with silent efficiency. Nikolai turned to me, and I realized I was still standing frozen in the foyer, clutching my pathetic carry-on like a lifeline. "Victor, show her to the guest suite. Make sure she has everything she needs." He lifted Natasha from the stroller, cradling her against his chest. "Emma, we'll discuss the details of your employment over dinner." 1 hour, then he was gone, striding through the apartment with Natasha in his arms, leaving me alone with Victor. The security guard gestured toward a curved staircase. "This way." I followed him up to the second floor, down a hallway lined with closed doors. He stopped at one near the end, opening it to reveal a bedroom that was bigger than my entire Chicago apartment. The space was decorated in soft creams and grays, with a king-sized bed that looked obscenely comfortable, an ensuite bathroom visible through an open door, and windows that overlooked the park. On the bed lay several shopping bags from stores I recognized but had never entered. Bloomingdale's, Saks, Nordstrom. "Mr. Volkov had these delivered while we were in transit," Victor explained in his heavily accented English. "He estimated your size. If anything doesn't fit, tell Elena, and she'll have them exchanged." I moved to the bags with shaking hands, pulling out tissue paper to reveal clothes. Real clothes. Expensive clothes. Jeans that probably cost $300, silk blouses in jewel tones, a cashmere sweater so soft it made my eyes sting, underwear and bras in exactly my size, which meant Nikolai had looked at me closely enough to make accurate guesses about my measurements. The thought made my skin prickle with something between violation and strange, unwelcome heat. "The bathroom is stocked," Victor continued. "Toiletries, makeup if you need it. Dinner is at 7. Don't be late." He left, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow felt final, like a cell door locking. I sank onto the bed, surrounded by shopping bags and luxury I'd never asked for, in an apartment I had no business being in, employed by a man whose very presence radiated danger. My phone buzzed in my pocket, my ancient, cracked screen phone that suddenly seemed even more pathetic in this environment. I pulled it out to find a text from my Chicago landlord, the one I'd been avoiding. "Emma, rent is 3 weeks overdue. If I don't receive payment by Friday, I'm starting eviction proceedings." "I'm sorry, but I have bills too." I stared at the message, then at the room around me, then at the expensive clothes Nikolai had bought for me without asking. I'd thought I was drowning in Chicago. But as I sat in this gilded cage, surrounded by luxury and overlooking a city I didn't know, I realized I might have just traded one kind of drowning for another. The only difference was that this time, I wasn't sure if I was being rescued or claimed. An hour later, I descended the stairs in a new outfit. Dark jeans that fit perfectly, and a soft gray cashmere sweater that probably cost more than a week's worth of tips. I'd showered in the enormous bathroom, using products that smelled like vanilla and sandalwood, and pulled my damp hair back into a simple braid. I found Nikolai in what I assumed was the dining room, though calling it that felt insufficient. It was a space that could have hosted a banquet, with a table long enough to seat 20. He sat at one end, Natasha's carrier beside his chair, and he was typing something on his phone with sharp, aggressive movements. He looked up as I entered, and something flickered in his eyes as he took in my appearance. "Better," he said, which wasn't quite a compliment but felt like one anyway. "Sit." I took the chair to his right, close enough to reach Natasha if she needed me. Elena appeared with plates of food, pasta and some kind of cream sauce, fresh bread, a salad with ingredients I didn't recognize. The smell made my stomach clench with hunger. "Eat," Nikolai commanded, watching me. "You're too thin." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks." He cut into his own pasta with precise movements. "That changes now. While you work for me, you'll be healthy. Natasha needs someone who has the strength to care for her properly. I wanted to argue, to assert some kind of independence, but he wasn't wrong. I had been skipping meals, rationing my food budget to keep my head barely above water. I picked up my fork and took a bite, and the flavors exploded on my tongue, rich, complex, perfectly seasoned. We ate in silence for several minutes before Nikolai spoke again. The contract will be ready tomorrow morning. My lawyer is drawing it up now. He set down his fork, giving me his complete attention. But there are some things you need to understand that won't be in the contract. Rules that are non-negotiable. Okay. First, Natasha's safety is paramount. If I tell you to do something regarding her security, you do it immediately without question. That includes evacuating, hiding, or following instructions from Victor or Dmitri. A chill ran down my spine. Why would we need to evacuate? Let's hope you never find out. His expression was unreadable. Second, you don't discuss me, my business, or anything you see in this house with anyone outside of it. No friends, no family, no casual conversations with strangers. Nothing. The NDA? The NDA is a legal document. This is survival. He leaned forward slightly. There are people who would love to know details about my private life, about Natasha, about any vulnerability I might have. You represent a vulnerability now, Emma. Which means you need to be protected. Protected from what? From people like me, but with fewer principles. He picked up his wine glass. I hadn't even noticed Elena pouring it, and took a measured sip. Third rule. When we're in public together, you follow my lead. If I introduce you as Natasha's nanny, that's all you are. If I tell you to stay close, you stay close. If I tell you to leave, you leave. You make it sound like I'm in danger. You are. His bluntness was staggering. The moment you accepted this position, you became part of my world. And my world is dangerous, Emma, but I promise you this. No one will touch you while you're under my protection. No one will hurt you, threaten you, or make you afraid. His eyes held mine, dark and intense. You're mine now, and I protect what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have terrified me. Instead, it made something warm and dangerous unfurl in my chest. I'm not yours, I said softly. I work for you. That's not the same thing, isn't it? He smiled, sharp and predatory. We'll see. Natasha chose that moment to wake with a soft cry, and I immediately moved to unbuckle her from the carrier. She was hungry. I could tell from the particular quality of her fussing, and I looked at Nikolai questioningly. There are bottles in the kitchen. I'll show you. He led me through the apartment to a kitchen that belonged in a restaurant, all stainless steel and expensive appliances. He opened a refrigerator stocked with pre-made bottles, pulling one out and testing its temperature with practiced efficiency. I had a service deliver these, he explained. Formula, bottles, everything. But you'll need to order whatever else she needs. Elena can help you figure out the logistics. I took the bottle and settled into a chair in the adjacent breakfast nook, positioning Natasha in my arms. She latched on immediately, her dark eyes fixed on my face as she drank. Nikolai leaned against the counter, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. She trusts you, he said quietly. She's never trusted anyone like that before. Not even me. She will. She just needs time. I don't have time. The confession came out rough, almost vulnerable. I have enemies, Emma. People who would love to use her against me. Every day she's small like this, helpless, is a day she's at risk. I need her to be safe, to be strong, to have someone who loves her enough to protect her when I can't. You're her father. You'll always protect her. I'm not invincible. He pushed away from the counter, moving to stand beside us. His hand came down to rest on my shoulder. Heavy, possessive, burning through the cashmere. But together, maybe we can keep her safe. Maybe we can give her something better than what either of us had. I looked up at him, at the harsh planes of his face softened slightly in the kitchen light, and realized with dawning horror that I was already in too deep. I'd walked into his trap willingly, and the cage door had closed so softly I hadn't even heard the lock click into place. The first 3 days in Nikolai's penthouse passed in a blur of adjustment and growing unease. I settled into a routine with Natasha, feeding her every 3 hours, learning the specific rhythm of her needs, the way her face scrunched before she cried, the soft cooing sounds she made when content. She was an easy baby, despite that first chaotic encounter on the plane, and I found myself falling for her with a completeness that terrified me. Every time I held her, I felt Mia's ghost receding slightly, as if my daughter was giving me permission to love again. But it wasn't just Natasha who occupied my thoughts. Nikolai was everywhere and nowhere, a presence that dominated the apartment even when he wasn't physically in it. He left for work before dawn. I never heard him go, but his coffee cup would be in the sink, evidence of his passage. He returned at unpredictable hours, sometimes for lunch, sometimes not until late evening when Natasha was already asleep. But when he was home, his attention was absolute. He'd find me in the nursery or the living room, wherever I'd settled with Natasha, and he'd watch. Just watch, with those dark, unreadable eyes, as I changed diapers or sang lullabies or played peekaboo. Then he'd step forward, hands extended, and I'd transfer his daughter to him. The transformation was remarkable. The cold, dangerous man who commanded fear melted into something softer when he held Natasha. Not soft exactly. Nikolai would never be soft, but gentler. Present. He'd talk to her in Russian, words I didn't understand, but that sounded like endearments, like promises. And she'd gaze up at him with complete trust. This tiny person who had no idea her father was a man other people feared. On the 4th day, Elena knocked on my door at 7 in the morning. "Mr. Volkov requests your presence in his study," she said, her tone making it clear this wasn't actually a request. I'd been dressed for only 20 minutes, still adjusting to the new clothes that hung in my closet, an entire wardrobe that had appeared overnight, organized by color and function. I wore dark jeans and a cream silk blouse that felt like water against my skin, and I'd started taking more care with my appearance. Not for Nikolai, I told myself, just because these clothes demanded respect. The study was on the 1st floor, down a hallway I hadn't explored yet. I knocked softly on the heavy wooden door. "Come in." Nikolai sat behind a massive desk, his laptop open in front of him, multiple monitors displaying information I couldn't decipher from the doorway. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms marked with scars I'd noticed before but never asked about. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. "Sit." He gestured to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. I sat, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from trembling. He closed the laptop and gave me his full attention. "You've been here 4 days. How are you adjusting?" "Fine. Natasha is wonderful. The apartment is overwhelming, but I'm managing. Good." He slid a folder across the desk toward me. "Your contract. Read it carefully. If you have questions, ask them now." I opened the folder with shaking hands. The contract was dense with legal language, but the key points were clear. $60,000 annually, housing and benefits included, 30 days notice required for termination from either party, extensive confidentiality clauses, and several pages of rules regarding Natasha's care and security protocols. One clause made me pause. Employee agrees to be available for travel on short notice and to relocate temporarily as required by employer's security needs. Relocate? I looked up at him. If there's a threat, we leave New York. Sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. You and Natasha will come with me. His tone brooked no argument. Non-negotiable. I kept reading. The severance terms were generous. If I left after the trial month, I'd receive $5,000. After 6 months, $15,000. The longer I stayed, the more substantial the payout. It was designed to keep me locked in, I realized. Golden handcuffs disguised as generosity. There's a clause here about limited communication with outside parties, I said slowly. Does that mean I can't talk to my friends, my family? You can talk to them, but not about me, not about where you live, not about Natasha beyond basic details. He leaned back in his chair. Do you have family in Chicago? No. My parents died when I was 23, car accident. I have a cousin in Oregon I haven't spoken to in 5 years. Friends. I thought of the scattered acquaintances from the diner, the people I'd grabbed drinks with occasionally but never really connected to. Not really. After Mia died, I couldn't maintain relationships. Something shifted in his expression. Then this clause shouldn't be a problem. What about romantic relationships? The question came out before I could stop it, and heat flooded my cheeks. Am I allowed to date? Is that restricted? Nikolai's eyes darkened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Are you seeing someone? No. But if I wanted to? No. The single word hung between us, flat and absolute. Excuse me? While you work for me, while you live in my home and care for my daughter, you don't date. He said it as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. It's a security risk. Anyone you bring into your life becomes someone I have to vet, someone who could potentially gain access to information about me and mine. So no, you don't date. That's not legal. You can't control my personal life. I'm not controlling anything. I'm setting boundaries for employment. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. If you want to date Emma, then don't sign the contract. Walk away now, and I'll have Victor drive you back to Chicago with enough money to cover 6 months of rent. My hands clenched in my lap. And Natasha? We'll learn to trust someone else eventually. But his jaw was tight, and I could see the lie in the tension of his shoulders. We stared at each other across the desk, locked in a battle of wills I wasn't sure I wanted to win. Finally, I reached for the pen he'd placed beside the contract. Where do I sign? Victory flashed in his eyes, quickly masked. He showed me where to initial and sign, and I did so with a hand that didn't shake as much as I expected. When I finished, he took the contract and locked it in a drawer of his desk. Welcome to the family, Emma. The word family did something strange to my chest. That afternoon, Nikolai took me and Natasha to Central Park. It was the first time I'd left the apartment since arriving, and the autumn air felt crisp and clean after days of recycled, climate-controlled perfection. But we didn't go alone. Victor and Dmitri flanked us, walking several paces behind as Nikolai pushed Natasha's stroller along the path. 2 other men I didn't recognize walked ahead, their eyes constantly scanning the crowds. A black SUV crawled along the park road parallel to us, keeping pace. Is this normal? I asked, watching a family give us a wide berth, the parents pulling their children closer as they noticed our entourage. This is every day, Nikolai replied. I don't go anywhere without security. Which means Natasha doesn't go anywhere without security. Which now means you don't go anywhere without security. I'm not a prisoner. No. You're protected. He stopped the stroller near a bench overlooking the lake. There's a difference. I sat on the bench, and he settled beside me, close enough that his thigh pressed against mine. Natasha slept peacefully in her stroller, a pink knit cap covering her dark hair. Why do you need this much security? I asked quietly. What exactly do you do, Nikolai? He was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I facilitate business transactions that require discretion. I move money for people who prefer to operate outside traditional banking systems. I provide protection for clients who need it, and solutions for problems that can't be solved legally. You're a criminal. I'm a businessman who operates in gray areas. He turned to look at me. Does that frighten you? Yes. Good. Fear keeps you cautious. Cautious keeps you alive. His hand found my knee again, that possessive touch I was starting to recognize. But I've never hurt someone who didn't deserve it, Emma. I have rules, codes I don't break. And the most important one is this. Family is sacred. Natasha is sacred. And now, by extension, so are you. I'm not your family. I'm your employee. Are you? His thumb traced circles against my jeans. You live in my home. You care for my daughter. You eat at my table and sleep under my roof. That sounds like family to me. Before I could respond, one of the advanced security men approached quickly, speaking to Nikolai in rapid Russian. Nikolai's entire demeanor changed. Shoulders tensing, jaw tightening, eyes going cold and flat. What is it? I asked. Nothing you need to worry about. He stood, already pulling out his phone. Victor, take them back to the apartment. Now. What's happening? Emma. He gripped my chin, forcing me to meet his eyes. Go home. Stay there. Don't leave until I tell you it's safe." Then he was gone, striding toward one of the waiting cars with Dmitri and another guard. The SUV peeled away before the door was fully closed. Victor moved to the stroller. "Come, we go." "Is he in danger?" "Mr. Volkov is always in danger. Is why he has us." Victor's expression was grim. "But today, maybe more than usual, we must go." The trip back to the apartment was tense and quick. Victor took a different route than we'd used before, and I noticed him speaking constantly into an earpiece, coordinating with someone. When we arrived, he swept through the apartment before allowing me to enter with Natasha. "Lock doors. Don't open for anyone except me, Dmitri, or Mr. Volkov. Understand?" "Victor, what's going on?" "Just precaution." But his hand rested on the weapon at his hip. "You have my number. Call if anything strange. Anything at all." Then I was alone with Natasha, listening to the locks engage, wondering what kind of world I'd entered where a walk in the park could end with armed guards and evacuation protocols. Nikolai didn't come home that night. Or the next. Elena assured me everything was fine, that this was normal, that Mr. Volkov often had business that kept him away. But I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she checked her phone compulsively, the extra security that appeared outside the apartment building. I spent the hours taking care of Natasha, trying not to imagine the worst, trying not to think about the scars on Nikolai's arms, the weapon Victor carried, the casual way Nikolai had said, "I've never hurt someone who didn't deserve it," as if hurting people was simply part of his job description. On the third night, I was up at 2 a.m. with Natasha when I heard the elevator. My heart jumped into my throat. I held Natasha closer, backing toward the nursery, ready to lock myself inside and call Victor like he'd instructed. Then Nikolai appeared in the doorway. He looked like he'd been through hell. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, blood staining the white fabric. His knuckles were split and bruised. A cut above his eyebrow had been hastily closed with butterfly bandages. But he was alive, whole, moving with that same predatory grace despite obvious pain. "You're hurt," I breathed. "I'm fine." He crossed to me, his eyes moving over Natasha first, checking that she was unharmed before landing on me. "You stayed. Where else would I go? Smart women run when men like me bleed." His hand cupped my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone. "Are you smart, Emma?" "Apparently not." Something fierce and possessive flared in his eyes. He leaned down, and for a heart-stopping moment I thought he was going to kiss me. Instead, his lips brushed my forehead, tender and claiming all at once. "Mine," he whispered against my skin. "You're mine now. Do you understand? I should have pulled away, should have demanded answers, should have asserted my independence, should have remembered that I was his employee and nothing more. Instead, I stood frozen with his daughter in my arms and his blood on my silk blouse, and whispered back, "Yes." The weeks that followed Nikolai's bloody return blurred together in a rhythm that felt both dangerous and inevitable. I stopped questioning the armed guards who appeared and disappeared, stopped flinching when Nikolai came home with new bruises or cuts that Elena would tend to with practiced efficiency. I learned to read the tension in his shoulders, to know when business had gone well or poorly by the way he held Natasha. And Natasha thrived. She smiled now, real, genuine smiles that lit up her entire face. She laughed when I made silly faces, reached for me when she was tired, and had started to show the first signs of trying to roll over. Watching her grow, being part of her daily miracles, filled some of the emptiness that Mia's death had carved into my soul. But it was Nikolai who consumed my thoughts in the quiet moments. He'd started joining us for breakfast, appearing in the kitchen in tailored suits that probably cost more than a car, sitting across from me while I fed Natasha her morning bottle. He'd ask about her night, about any changes in her routine, and his eyes would linger on me in ways that made my skin warm and my pulse quicken. The line between employer and something else had blurred so gradually, I hadn't noticed it disappearing until it was already gone. It was a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after I'd signed the contract, when everything changed. I was in the nursery, changing Natasha's diaper and singing softly to her, when I heard raised voices from downstairs. Nikolai's voice, cold and lethal, and another man's, unfamiliar, accented differently than Victor or Dmitri. "You don't understand what you're asking." I understand perfectly, Nikolai's voice cut like a blade. And the answer is no. She's leverage. You know this. Give her to us, and we forget the shipment. The sound of impact, flesh on flesh, followed by a heavy thud. My hands froze on Natasha's onesie. Leverage. They were talking about someone as leverage. My mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Get out of my home, Nikolai snarled, and tell Dimitrov that if he sends another messenger, I'll send back a body. Footsteps. The elevator. Then silence. I finished dressing Natasha with shaking hands, then lifted her into my arms and moved to the nursery door. I shouldn't eavesdrop. I should stay out of Nikolai's business like the contract stipulated. But fear overrode caution. I crept to the top of the stairs, holding Natasha close, and peered down. Nikolai stood in the foyer, his hand pressed against the wall, head bowed. His knuckles were bleeding again. He'd hit the messenger, clearly. Victor stood nearby, speaking in low, urgent Russian. We need to move them, Victor said, switching to English. If Dimitrov knows about the girl, he doesn't know about Emma. Nikolai's voice was rough. He's fishing, trying to find weaknesses. She is weakness. The baby is weakness. You know this. They're not weaknesses. Nikolai turned, and the expression on his face was pure fury. They're my family. And I don't negotiate with my family's safety. Victor fell silent, and I watched as Nikolai composed himself, smoothing his hair back, straightening his jacket. When he finally looked up, his eyes found me immediately. How much did you hear? There was no point in lying. Enough. He climbed the stairs with predatory grace, and I backed up instinctively, still holding Natasha. He stopped inches away, close enough that I could smell the copper scent of blood on his hands and the familiar cologne beneath it. We need to talk. His gaze dropped to Natasha, something soft and vulnerable crossing his features. But first, let me hold my daughter. I transferred Natasha into his arms, watching as he cradled her against his chest, pressing his face to her dark hair. He stood like that for a long moment, just breathing her in, and I saw the mask crack. Saw the fear beneath the control. Someone wants to hurt her, I said quietly. Wants to use her against you. Many people want to hurt her, want to use her, kill her, take her from me. He looked up, and his eyes were bleak. This is my world, Emma. This is what it means to be Nikolai Volkov's daughter. To be constantly at risk, constantly protected, never truly safe. Then why keep her? Why not? I stopped, realizing how terrible the suggestion sounded. Give her up? His laugh was bitter. Send her away to be raised by someone else, somewhere safe? He shook his head. I've considered it. Every time there's a threat, every time someone gets too close, I think about it. But I can't. She's all I have left of Irina. She's the only pure thing in my entire goddamn life. I'd burn the world down before I let anyone take her from me. So what do? We? He studied me intently. You could leave, Emma, right now. I'd pay you everything I promised. Set you up somewhere far from here. Far from this danger. You've fulfilled your contract. You've done more than I had any right to ask. Is that what you want? For me to leave? What I want, he said slowly, dangerously. And what's best for you are two very different things. Natasha made a soft cooing sound, and we both looked down at her. She was watching us with those dark, knowing eyes, her tiny hand wrapped around Nikolai's finger. I'm not leaving, I heard myself say. Not you, not her. I'm staying. Emma, I'm staying, I repeated, stronger this time. Whatever this threat is, whatever danger you're facing, I'm staying. Because she needs me. And because... I stopped, the words catching in my throat. Because? His free hand caught my chin, tilting my face up. Say it. Because you need me too. The words hung between us, raw and honest and terrifying. Nikolai's thumb traced my lower lip, and the heat in his eyes made my knees weak. I need you, he agreed, his voice rough. I need you in ways that should be illegal. Ways that definitely violate our contract. His hand slid into my hair, gripping gently. I want you, Emma Carter. Want to keep you locked in this apartment where no one can touch you, where you're safe in mine and never leaving. Is that what you want to hear? That I'm obsessed with you? That watching you with my daughter makes me want things I have no right to want? My breath came in short gasps. Nikolai, tell me to stop. Tell me you're just my employee, nothing more, and I'll back away. I'll never touch you like this again. But I couldn't say it. Couldn't lie when the truth was written in every racing beat of my heart. I can't, I whispered. He kissed me. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was claiming, possessive. Months of tension exploding into desperate contact. His hand fisted in my hair, angling my head exactly where he wanted it, and his mouth moved against mine with bruising intensity. I melted into him, into the kiss, into the dangerous heat that had been building between us since that first moment on the plane. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathing hard. Natasha had fallen asleep against his chest, completely unconcerned with the seismic shift happening around her. I'm putting you both in the Hamptons house, Nikolai said, his voice rough with desire and determination. Today, Victor will take you, and there will be additional security. You'll stay there until I've dealt with Dimitrov and his threats. I'm not hiding. Yes, you are. His tone brooked no argument. You're taking my daughter somewhere safe, and you're staying there until I make sure no one will ever threaten either of you again. This isn't negotiable, Emma. This is me protecting what's mine. And what are you going to do? What I do best. The cold mask slid back into place. Eliminate threats. The Hamptons house was beautiful. A sprawling estate overlooking the ocean, with gardens and a private beach, and enough security to guard a small country. Victor settled us into a suite on the second floor, windows overlooking endless blue water, and posted guards at every entrance. 3 days passed with no word from Nikolai. I tried not to imagine the worst, tried to focus on Natasha, on her schedule and her needs and the milestone moments that kept happening. Her first successful roll from back to belly, the way she'd started grabbing at toys, the explosive giggle when I blew raspberries on her stomach. But at night, alone in the massive bed, I couldn't stop thinking about Nikolai. About his kiss, his confession, the violence implicit in eliminate threats. On the 4th day, Victor's phone rang at dawn. I was already awake, feeding Natasha her morning bottle when I heard him answer in the adjacent room. The conversation was brief and in Russian, but I caught one word I'd learned to recognize. Gotovo. Done. Victor appeared in the doorway minutes later. We go back to city. Mr. Volkov is waiting. Is he okay? He is fine. Dimitrov is not. Victor's expression was grim. Mr. Volkov says to tell you he kept his promise. You are safe now. The drive back to Manhattan felt endless. Natasha slept in her car seat while I stared out the window, watching the landscape change from beach to highway to city. What had Nikolai done? What did Dimitrov is not mean? Did I even want to know? The apartment was quiet when we arrived. Elena took Natasha from me immediately, murmuring something about giving us privacy, and then I was alone in the foyer. Nikolai? My voice echoed in the vast space. Here. I followed his voice to his study, pushing open the door to find him standing at the window, hands in his pockets, looking out over the city. He'd showered recently, his hair was still damp, and changed into fresh clothes, but I could see the new bruises on his neck, the way he held himself with careful control. You're hurt, I said, moving into the room. I've been worse. He didn't turn around. Dimitrov won't be threatening anyone again. Neither will his associates. I made sure of that. How? You don't want details, Emma. Trust me on that. I stopped a few feet behind him, close enough to feel his heat but not touching. What now? Now? He finally turned, and the intensity in his eyes stole my breath. Now, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Okay. That contract you signed, the one that says you work for me, that you're my employee and nothing more, do you want to renegotiate? My heart hammered. Into what? Into something real. He closed the distance between us, cupping my face with both hands. I want you, Emma. Not as Natasha's nanny, not as someone who works for me, as mine. my partner, my lover, eventually, if you'll have me, my wife. The word wife made my head spin. Nikolai, I know I'm not a good man. I know my life is dangerous and complicated, and you deserve someone normal, someone safe. But I can give you things that safe man never could. His thumb stroked my cheekbones. I can give you purpose. I can give you a family. I can give you a daughter who already loves you and needs you. And I can promise you that for the rest of your life, you'll never be invisible again. You'll never be forgotten or overlooked or left behind, because I see you, Emma Carter. I've seen you since that moment on the plane when you were brave enough to help a stranger's crying baby. Tears burned behind my eyes. I'm scared. I know, but I'm asking you to be brave again. He pressed his forehead against mine. Stay with us, not as an employee, as family, real family. I thought about Chicago, about the empty apartment and the diner shifts and the loneliness that had been slowly killing me. I thought about Mia, about the daughter I'd lost and the ghost I'd been carrying for 3 years. And I thought about Natasha, about the way she smiled when she saw me, the way she'd already claimed a piece of my broken heart. Most of all, I thought about Nikolai, dangerous, possessive, violent Nikolai, and the way he looked at me like I was something precious worth protecting. Yes, I whispered. Yes to all of it. His kiss was different this time. Still possessive, still claiming, but tender too, like he was sealing a promise, binding us together in ways that went beyond contracts or employment. When we finally broke apart, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. I bought this 3 weeks ago, he admitted. I've been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment, waiting to be sure you wouldn't run. Inside the box was a ring, emerald-cut diamond, simple and elegant, and absolutely perfect. This is insane, I said, even as he slid it onto my finger. We barely know each other. It's only been 6 weeks. I knew after 6 hours on a plane. He kissed my knuckles, right above the ring. I knew when you calmed my daughter with nothing but instinct and love. When you looked at me without fear even when you should have been terrified. When you stayed even after you saw my blood and understood what I am. What are you? I asked softly. Yours. He pulled me close, and I rested my head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. Completely, obsessively, irrevocably yours. Somewhere in the apartment, Natasha started to cry, not distressed, just awake and wanting attention. We both smiled at the sound, and Nikolai took my hand, lacing our fingers together. Come on, he said. Our daughter needs us. Our daughter. The words settled into my chest, warm and right and healing. We found Natasha in the nursery with Elena, who took one look at the ring on my finger and broke into a rare smile. Congratulations, she said warmly, handing Natasha to me. I settled into the rocking chair with her, and Nikolai knelt beside us, his hand on my knee, the 3 of us forming a small, perfect circle. I never thought I'd have this again, I admitted. A family. Purpose. Someone to love. Neither did I, Nikolai said quietly. After Irina died, I thought that was it. That Natasha was all I'd ever have, all I'd ever deserve. He looked up at me, and the vulnerability in his eyes took my breath away. Thank you for proving me wrong. Natasha grabbed at my hair with a giggle, oblivious to the magnitude of the moment. To her, we were simply the constants in her world, the people who fed her and held her and loved her unconditionally. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Outside the window, New York City sprawled beneath us, full of danger and possibility, and a million stories unfolding simultaneously. But here, in this nursery, with this dangerous man kneeling at my feet, and this precious baby in my arms, I'd found something I thought I'd lost forever. I'd found home. 3 years ago, I'd lost a daughter, and thought I'd never recover. 6 weeks ago, I'd boarded a plane running from my grief, convinced I was broken beyond repair. Now, I was exactly where I needed to be, claimed by a man who saw me when I'd been invisible, loved by a child who wasn't mine by blood, but was mine in every way that mattered. The future would be complicated, dangerous, Nikolai's world didn't come with guarantees of safety or normalcy. But as he kissed my forehead and Natasha curled her tiny fingers around his, I realized I didn't want normal. I wanted this. All of it.